careful what you wish for, Peter. The multiverse is a concept of which we know frighteningly little. Today, we are reviewing Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, the latest Marvel production. Usually I'm not that arsed about Marvel movies. Most of the time they're just average or just okay, just acceptable. For this new one though, I was actually keenly anticipating it because it's directed by Sam Raimi. For those of you who don't know, Sam Raimi directed the Evil Dead trilogy and the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man films. He's a very unique and talented indie director and he's got quite a big cult following. He's the most out there director that Marvel have ever hired for one of these films. So ever since he was brought onto this movie, I was always intrigued by what we'd get. These Marvel films don't seem to be going anywhere and there's a lot of them, so we might as well have some directed by like talented filmmakers. And also the idea of the multiverse is a pretty cool concept to explore in film. Not specifically the MCU multiverse, but just that concept on its own. It's like a cool, interesting idea that you can do loads of trippy shit with. Just an infinite amount of alternate realities where a few things are different and just makes for like wacky storytelling. And the fact that we had Sam Raimi on board to bring this concept to life really made this film promising. Marvel do hire a lot of indie directors to add flair to what would otherwise be fairly formulaic movies. You can always sense the style of the director bleeding through, but in most instances it's always been a little too faint for me. But seeing as though now they'd brought in Sam Raimi for this new one, I wanted him to have a substantial amount of creative control. I didn't want it to be a potentially good Sam Raimi film that was diluted by the Marvel formula, because they do for the most part always dilute the styles of the given indie director that they've brought on to the film. And it's almost like they're halfway committing to the style, but they don't have the balls to fully go through with it. And if you want to make an interesting and cool film, you gotta have some balls, you gotta take some risks. And as is evident with the vast majority of Sam Raimi's works, he is a director who takes risks, who does wacky, goofy shit. Just to put things into perspective for you, my favourite Marvel film is Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 by James Gunn. Again, I think the first Guardians of the Galaxy is a little bit of James Gunn, but again diluted by the Marvel formula. But then you had Volume 2, which felt a lot more like its own movie, like very personal, and that's what I'm looking for with these Marvel movies, is a personal film that feels like it's a passion project. It's not just another franchise movie. But anyway, let's just get on with reviewing this new film, Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. So, is this a good film? Yes. Sam Raimi did it. This feels more like a Sam Raimi film than a Marvel film, which feels pretty fucking awesome to say. I'm quite surprised at the amount of creative control that he seems to have been given here. His style is all over this movie and in all the best possible ways because it elevates what this film's going for. It almost perfectly complements all of the aspects of the film, like the story, the characters, the set pieces, even the flow of the film and the editing and the structure. If we're talking on a cinematographic basis, this is the very best Marvel film. Without a fucking doubt. Guardians Volume 2 is definitely a close second when it comes to that, but that's more so because it has a very lively and energetic colour palette. Volume 2 is a very pretty movie. The cinematography of Multiverse of Madness is more so in service of elevating all of the different moods and feelings of the film. It's more so putting emphasis on the visual storytelling side of things, like the camera movements and the energy of the scenes. Multiverse of Madness has the same cinematographic, frenzied liveliness as Drag Me to Hell, and I've got to say, it is pretty insane to watch what is supposedly a crowd-pleasing, mass-appealing Marvel blockbuster and see so many references to these extremely gory cult horror films from the 80s. It's pretty fucking cool, and not only are there references, but there are full-on repurposed uses of his directorial techniques that perfectly fit for what he's going for in this film. The frenetic and fluid camera movement that's in the Evil Dead films, the kind that makes it seem as if the camera has a mind of its own, that's now also present in this film as it's incorporated into the breakneck dramatic action set pieces, and it helps to make this film film truly and viscerally chaotic. Techniques that you've seen all throughout Sam Raimi's body of work are present here, and it's extremely fascinating to see. Unlike a lot of Marvel movies, the action in this film is imaginative and genuinely interesting to follow. At the end of the day, action is just fast-paced drama, and boy oh boy does Sam Raimi specialise in that. He's undoubtedly the man for the job when it comes to high-frequency drama and theatrics. There's a lot of trippy shit going on in this film, but you never lose your sense of place. You always know which characters are fighting, where they are, why they're doing it. Every action scene comes about organically as they all move the plot along. Thus they never feel obligatory or as if they just exist for their own sake. This film has a very good flow to it. It's got a very purposeful pace. Another thing that Raimi does well is he infuses his superhero films with the appropriate level of jolly theatricality. That's how he went about making those old Tobey Maguire Spider-Man films.
Hey you guys, no playing in the streets.
Yes, Mr. Spider-Man.
See ya.
And again, that campy tone returns in Multiverse of Madness, and it's refreshing to see a modern blockbuster embrace its corny identity. This film retains that cheesy superhero earnestness that Sam Raimi is known for, and because of that, on an escapism level, it's made all the more immersive because you have these colourful characters, these larger-than-life do-gooders. It's what superhero films are all about. Raimi is fond of incorporating these old-fashioned comic book tropes in his movies. The operatic villains, the damsels in distress, the pure-hearted protagonists. So Multiverse of Madness has its fair share of those. It's just down to small details like how Doctor Strange spots the danger from the balcony and he goes into superhero mode. That's like very reminiscent to Christopher Reeve's Superman. And the look of that big tentacle monster in the opening scene, it was just so expressive. That fucking eye, it was just so well animated. It was like a cartoon character, but in a good way. You also see a lot of hammy, overacting extras there present in this film, and then there's one particular set piece near the end of the film that just screams imaginative individuality. It just screams, hey, this was dreamed up by a creative mind. This is what imagination looks like. This is what it's for. Who knew that a spectacular multiverse film could actually be spectacular? When Martin Scorsese says that something is not cinema, he means that it has failed at its job to immerse the viewer and provide them with a substantial experience of escapism, which this film does not fail at doing. So Martin, that's my recommendation. Star Wars is cinema, Lord of the Rings is cinema, Back to the Future is cinema, The Dark Knight is cinema, the Spider-Man films are cinema, Mad Max Fury Road is cinema. Making truly epic escapism is not supposed to be fucking easy. Another thing that this was sold to us as was a film that was going to strongly lean into the horror genre. That's one of the predominant reasons Sam Raimi was brought on board, and I'm happy to say that for the most part it lives up to that. It's genuinely quite threatening and frightening. It really teeters at the very edge of its 12A rating, which is a very good thing. It has the potential to genuinely freak audiences out. There is gore in this film that is successfully squeamish but also partially disturbing, just due to the malevolence of how it's portrayed. It's like cruel and violent, and you're like, oh fuck. And I'm not bullshitting you about that because I specifically remember feeling that at certain parts. Pertaining to the horror and the gore, this film does far more with its 12A rating than The Batman did with its 15 rating. This is way more shocking and frightening than that lightweight Jigsaw pastiche. Multiverse of Madness has a fair chance of pissing families off, like the kind of families who are like, oh yeah, we're just going to see the new Marvel film, with the kids, yeah, it's going to be a nice, pleasant evening, but then they see that and it's like, oh shit, that's a bit edgy, whoa. Again, these Marvel films, they always say, oh yeah, we're going to lean heavily into this as inspiration, this is going to be a spy thriller, this is going to be a John Hughes film. Like, really? Spider-Man films aren't fucking John Hughes films, like, just barely, just like a lightweight pastiche. But Multiverse of Madness delivers on that because they gave Sam Raimi a substantial amount of creative control. We decided with this film we were going to channel into those old Evil Dead Sam Raimi films, so we decided to actually fucking get Sam Raimi to do it. With the Joker, we decided we were going to harken back to those 70s character studies like Martin Scorsese's Taxi Driver. Why don't you just get fucking Martin Scorsese to do the Joker then, you fucking idiots? Multiverse of Madness is a visceral experience which doesn't come around a lot with these Marvel films. It's a sensory overload of thrill, shock and terror. Raimi always takes things to such hyperactive extremes, so much so that there's inherent comedy in the chaotic nature of his films. And Multiverse of Madness is bizarre and wacky and riveting and tense. And I also can't preface enough how visually expressive Sam Raimi is as a director. You can have all the pretty looking cinematography you want, but Raimi's is without a doubt first and foremost in service of propelling the emotions and feelings of what's on screen. It's just fucking perfect visual storytelling. And now in this segment of the video we do start to stray into spoiler territory. The villains in Sam Raimi's films are always as important as the heroes. It's hinted in the trailer that Wanda was going to be some kind of villain in this film. Maybe an anti-hero. But this film just wastes no time in fully committing to it. She is the main central villain of this film, and it very quickly establishes her as a genuine threat to the world of the film. Wanda was probably my favourite part of the whole film, because I found her a lot more captivating than Stephen Strange himself. It's almost completely structured and anchored around her character, and she carries the whole thing. And the performance is so colourful and cheesy and larger than life. The actress Elizabeth Olson is just playing into this operatic villain. It's like a classic malevolent villain who's just like so animated. It's so delightful and expressive and immersive. This is the very best depiction of Wanda. It's the most energetic I've ever seen Elizabeth Olsen act. It was so much fun, and again looking back on it, it's surreal to think that this is an MCU movie. There's also the fact that Sam Raimi worked on the film Oz the Great and Powerful, which might have been like an influence in terms of like the Wicked Witch of the West. I haven't seen the film myself, but maybe he's carrying over some techniques he learned in that film to this. She acts as this unstoppable, malevolent force that's on this vicious pursuit for the protagonists, and you feel the dread on behalf of the main characters. It's like Wanda's on the way, we need to get the fuck out of Dodge, and she only grows more and more frightening as the film goes on. It escalates well in that way. I suspect that people may be angry with where they've taken her character, but I truly don't give a shit. She was nothing in Age of Ultron. In Civil War, she's average, but mainly carried by Paul Bettany.
You text Mr. Bettany, let's burn Amber.
Yes.
The best parts of WandaVision were the times that hinted at this particular side to a character that this film fully embraces. She's my favourite MCU villain to date. She's so pronounced, which is a rare thing in these movies. I wasn't intimidated by Thanos in the same way I was intimidated by her character. Oh yeah, we're actually supposed to be fearful of movie villains, aren't we? If I were to name a few complaints that I had with the film, as a protagonist I don't find Doctor Strange all that interesting, but I did appreciate his character arc in this movie. I just found Wanda's character way more compelling, and I think Doctor Strange was carried by the fact that he was exploring the multiverse. The actress for America Chavez was pretty wooden in the beginning of the film, but I got used to it, and also that's kind of a part of Raimi's filmography. Goofy overacting, you could call it. I did end up liking her character though. I like how the portals she made were just like the obvious star shape. It was just like so comic booky and goofy. Rachel McAdams also has quite a big role in the film, and I did find her very flat. There were actually some line deliveries from her that were very robotic, mainly in the exposition scenes. There's still a little bit of postmodern Marvel humour in here that I could have done without. It luckily didn't deflate from the tension of the film, but seeing as how Sam Raimi has his own comedic style, I wish we'd just got Sam Raimi style jokes in place of the Marvel jokes. And I'll be real with you, there's probably loads of plot holes in there, but I don't give a shit. I really don't care. It's about fun, goofy, whimsical entertainment, and there were no plot holes that like jumped out at me, and that's fine. That means I was like immersed anyway. Overall, this may not be one of Raimi's best films. It might not be as viscerally immersive as his other films, but I'm still really happy with what we've got here. It's the most energetic, animated, and expressive Marvel movie. It's a good addition to Sam Raimi's filmography. I'd happily get it on Blu-ray. You know, it's funny to think it's helmed by a creative director, so I actually feel the emotions that the film wants me to feel. It's really weird. I think that's what they used to call a movie. This should set a new precedent for giving creative directors more control over these multi-million-dollar blockbusters. You let these imaginative people have this hands-on approach to these projects, and you get some really good fat escapism. I look forward to seeing A24's rendition of the multiverse with the film Everything Everywhere All at Once. I've heard that one's very, very, very good, very trippy. I do find it interesting that we're getting a film about the multiverse from both A24 and Marvel in such close proximity to each other, seeing as though the two are seen as the antithesis of each other, like small independent art house movies versus multi-million-dollar blockbuster movies. Anyway, yeah, that was just my 2 cents on the latest Marvel movie, Multiverse of Madness. What did you think about it? Let me know. I hope you enjoyed the review. Now fuck off.